Okay. Cortez and Montezuma, Chapter 12, Guatemozin. A new king, Guatemozin, was elected. Guatemozin was a nephew of Montezuma. Alive to the danger to his capital, this new king lost no time in making active preparations for resistance. Cortez was now near upon the carrying out of his new plans. His vessels, with which he proposed this time to attack the city, were nearly ready. The Spanish arms had been repaired, and every possible addition to the supply had been made. Powder only was needed. Saltpeter they had, but where could sulfur be found with which to make the powder? There's enough of it up in the volcano, said a soldier carelessly. Then we must have it, said Montano, a daring cavalier. Shall we bring the great crater to you? Laughed a soldier. No, said Montano, I will bring the sulfur from the volcano. And true enough, Montano and his party pushed their way to the top of that great volcano, Popocatépetl, let down a basket containing the brave leader into the very bottom of this smoking pit that he might scrape sulfur from the sides of the crater. Now, indeed, Cortez was ready to set out for Mexico again. Knowing the Aztecs would be lying in wait for him, he led his army through the most difficult and least traveled of all the mountain passes. As they reached the mountain tops and looked down upon the beautiful Aztec valley and upon the battleground of the Noche Triste, they said, Never again will we leave this country unvictorious, though it cost us our lives. Cortez determined to strike first upon the city of Iztapalpan. This city was situated on a narrow tongue of land with water on either side. The city was carefully diked and so preserved from the destructive overflow from the lakes. As Cortez approached, he was promptly assailed by the warriors from the city. On he pressed, driving the natives before him into the very streets of their city. The natives betook themselves to the houses built out upon the water and thence escaped across the lake. And now the Spaniards and their allies devoted themselves to sacking and burning the city. Busy in their cruel work, they had not noticed the gradually rising water about the city. Slowly, slowly it arose until at last the Spaniards perceived their peril. Instantly the retreat was sounded, and the army, loaded with what plunder they could carry with them, rushed from the city. Struggling under their burdens, they lost their footing, dropped their spoils, and were drowned in the lake.
Cortez too?
Well, I don't, probably not. But a lot of them, I guess. The survivors, wet, cold, exasperated, shook themselves out, wondering whether it had been by chance or by deliberate plan that they had been thus driven from the city they had so successfully sacked. Our plunder is lost in the water, our powder is spoiled, but the words were never finished. For down from the hillsides and across the fields came the shouts and yells and laughter of the escaped citizens, telling the Spaniards all too well that no mere accident had driven them thus from the city. And now for the great city, dividing his vessels into 3 divisions, that together they might enter the 3 causeways of the city, Cortez began his siege. He had already destroyed the aqueduct through which the city was supplied with water, and he now proposed each day to make an attack upon the natives and so hasten the end. Hardly had he stationed himself around the city when he was attacked himself by a great host of Mexicans. This time their blows were readily warded off by steady fire from the vessels. Can you close the draft on the fire, Cece? Halfway. Okay, he had already destroyed the aqueduct. Okay, I already read that. Hardly had he stationed himself around the city when he was attacked himself by a great host of Mexicans. This time their blows were readily warded off by steady fire from the vessels. No sooner had morning dawned than a second attack was made. In describing it, Cortez said, As far as eye could reach over the land and over the water, nothing but warriors could be seen. Their howls and yells filled the air. We drove them along the causeway, we stormed their entrenchment and crossed a bridge. Our artillery from the vessel swept away like grass before the wind the canoes. The Mexicans had driven piles into the water on which to trap our vessels as we came into the shallow water, but these we evaded. Pushing up into the city, we drove the enemy before us, burning the dwellings as we went. Thus did we spend our first day. Day after day the siege went on. Each day the Spaniards advanced, stormed the entrenchments, broke down the bridges, and each night did the natives endeavor to repair the work of the day. Again and again the Mexicans were put to flight, and again they rallied and rushed upon their foe anew. Never had a city been more desperately, more persistently besieged, and never had a city been more desperately, more persistently defended. Hour after hour Cortez expected terms of peace, but no such message came. The warriors seemed only to increase in fury. Though mowed down by the cannon's volley, the breach seemed only to be filled in by swarms from the adjoining fields. There seemed no end to their numbers, no end to their courage, no end to their schemes and devices for new attacks. Once an attempt to capture the Spanish vessels was made this way. Stakes were planted beneath the water, and nearby were placed canoes in ambush. Two of them paddled down to the nearest vessel, attracted the attention of the captains, who at once gave chase, when the Aztecs appeared to be greatly frightened, paddled rapidly toward the shore. The vessel, swooping down upon them, caught fast in the hidden stakes. Out came the hidden canoes, surrounding like wasps the vessel, and attacking it from every point. At another time, canoes appeared from the opposite side, loaded with provisions apparently for the besieged city. Cortez, however, seeing through this, sent a vessel to overtake them as they wished. Standing just outside the trap, the vessel invited the attack from the hidden canoes. Out rushed the canoes to attack the vessel. 2 shots from the vessel, however, the signal agreed upon, brought from some unknown place 6 concealed vessels. The Aztecs had been caught in their own trap. Swooping down upon the canoes, these vessels sunk many of the canoes, fired upon the crew, killing many and taking the rest prisoners. The Aztecs never tried to entrap the Spanish vessels again, although they turned their minds with equal activity upon other plans of attack. Day after day attacks were made, but with no seeming result. At length, an especial move was planned to take the marketplace. Early in the morning of this day, the Spaniards were astir. Dividing his men with their detachments, they entered the 3 avenues that led to the great square. On the 3 armies marched, carrying for a time all before them. Already the square was nearly reached. The division in the main avenue, wild with their success, sent word to Cortez, who was fighting his way up the narrowest and most difficult street. "We are almost there. We await orders to proceed into the square itself." "By no means advance until you have made your bridges firm, that you may have a way to retreat if necessary," answered he. "We have thought of all that," was the reply. But hardly had they advanced when down upon them pounced the Mexicans with such fury, so unexpectedly and so fiercely, that the Spaniards turned in flight. Down the street like dogs fled the Spaniards, pursued by the fleet-footed natives. "Hold!" cried Cortez, who knew full well that no bridge they had built would bear this crowding, pushing throng. In an instant the canal was heaped with Spaniards, blinded in their haste and fear. Over the sides went the Mexicans in hot pursuit. The canal was alive with the writhing forms of Spaniards and Mexicans, wrestling in deadly combat. Cortez and his men, rushing to the canal, pulled out from the water those who could be reached. Engaged in this, they heard not the approaching cloud of Mexican warriors. Down they came, closing around the little band of Spaniards. Already their yell of victory has sounded forth. "Cortez himself is captured! Cortez himself is captured! Now will our war god have a victim to his taste." Forward rushed a Spanish youth to his master's rescue. With one sweep of his sword, he cut off with one blow the arms of the captor. Again Cortez is free, and surrounded by his bodyguard, is saved from the foe. Ordering the other divisions to retreat, He himself with his body of men resisted an attack in the great square, but was defeated. Already the incense was burning in the Mexican temples in honor of their victory. Marching before Cortez, the victors, they threw some bleeding heads before him. Do you see, O Spaniard? This soon shall be your fate and the fate of all your pale-faced warriors. Upon this, the Mexicans sprang upon the Spaniards, fighting, wrestling with them hand to hand. Driven back, Cortez and his fearless band escaped to their camp. It had indeed been a terrible day. The Mexicans, full of delight at their victory, were already sacrificing their victims, burning incense, and reveling as was their custom after victory. Encouraged and buoyed up by this strange turning in the fortunes of their forces, Cortez knew full well that on the morrow they would be all the fiercer, bolder, and more furious for their day's success. The Spaniards seemed indeed hard-pressed. In these daily attacks upon the city many men had fallen, the ammunition had given out. Surrender seemed almost staring them in the face. As if this were not black enough, reports came from their outlying allies saying that the Mexicans were making inroads upon their lands and begging that forces be sent to their protection. Alas, said Cortez sadly, we are more in need of aid ourselves than able to give it. Still,
see, I'm gonna put the game away, okay? I'm gonna put like the tiles in their boxes. Oh, no, because I put a game away.
It's almost done, okay? Still, knowing it would be a death blow to all hopes of success to acknowledge just now the weakness of his forces, Cortez sent detachments to the assistance of these allies. Fortunately, these detachments were successful in their engagements and returned to their quarters very little reduced.